do get quite scared. Stuck.
We might be surprised by McLaren terminating Daniel Ricciardo's contract sooner than expected, but he definitely wasn't. In fact, he knew exactly where he was falling short during his 2 disappointing seasons at Woking. So it turns out, he already saw McLaren doubting his abilities way before we did. In this video, we're going to talk about Ricciardo reflecting on racing for McLaren after being axed. So stay tuned. First off, Ricciardo hardly had any competitive options after the McLaren axe. From 2023, you won't be seeing Ricciardo on the F1 grid anymore, right after he was sacked by McLaren at the end of the last season. Why? Well, let's just say he didn't deliver the results the team expected him to. As for the Australian, he's going to be moving on to a 3rd driver contract with Red Bull and spending his first season off the grid. But we'll have you know that signing with Red Bull wasn't as easy as you'd think. In fact, right before doing so, he was actually considering a sabbatical because he hardly had any competitive options left. Sure, Haas and Williams reached out to him with a racing seat on the team, but the Australian wasn't even slightly interested because he didn't want to go to the back of the grid. In fact, he believed that leaving a competitive team and taking a year off would keep him in a better position for 2024, rather than going to the back of the grid with one of the 2 teams. So soon enough, he was in talks with a bunch of teams on the grid, trying to secure a starting seat for 2023. And when nothing worked out, Mercedes stepped in with a reserve driver role. Rumpus has it, the role came in expecting he'd be replacing Lewis Hamilton in 2024 after his contract was up. After all, everyone's talking about his retirement now. But as soon as this made headlines, it didn't take long for the 7-time champion to confirm that he won't be going anywhere anytime soon.
But from that point of view, like I don't look back into...
Following up, Ricciardo's next move would be a turning point for his F1 career. On top of that, the Mercedes team boss and Hamilton are in talks about a multi-year contract with their eyes set on a record-breaking 8th championship. On the other hand, right after his super consistent performance and his first victory at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, George Russell doesn't seem to be threatened by anyone right now. So clearly, Ricciardo had no chance for a racing seat on the team anytime soon. Instead, Red Bull came along with their offer, and it didn't take long for Ricciardo to accept it. Here's the thing, Ricciardo just knew he wasn't going to leave Formula One anytime soon. In fact, when asked if he'd consider leaving the sport for the Endurance Championship, the Australian said that a race like Le Mans would definitely be interesting, but the whole season? Not so much. Simply put, it'd be the same life, but just with different cars. On the other hand, all he needs is a breakup with a trip to the unknown, or at least that's what he said. In fact, it's the whole reason why he considered the sabbatical. He needs time to refocus and rebuild while planning a 2024 comeback with a racing seat in a competitive team. But that would mean risking being wiped off the F1 grid. So he's keeping one foot in the game with the reserve driver role at Red Bull. Not to mention, he noticed how McLaren doubted his abilities. Let's not forget that when he left Red Bull, it was because Max Verstappen had all the spotlight. So when he moved to Renault and later to McLaren, he had different expectations. Reflecting on his split with McLaren, he talked about how he could feel the tide turning internally right after the chain of disappointing results. In fact, it's exactly why their decision to terminate his contract a year earlier than expected wasn't really all that surprising. And it's not just about the team. Ricciardo wasn't happy with himself either, and he wasn't sure how to fix this. The last 2 seasons just weren't good enough, especially considering the fact that we know what he's capable of. On the other hand, he says that while he's always been proud of his talents, McLaren has definitely revealed some of his weaknesses. But no one's perfect, right? The good thing is he's going to use this to his advantage, because now he has a year to reflect on those weaknesses. Every season, it's super difficult to implement whatever you've learned almost immediately. It's not just about knowing what to do, but also about how you need to look at yourself from a third perspective. And that's why taking a step back to see what's wrong and work on it seems like a win-win situation for the Australian. And soon enough, we're hoping he has the car he can do it in as well. As for the 2022 season, Daniel Ricciardo finished 12th in the Drivers' World Championship with 37 points scored and 85 units behind his McLaren teammate Lando Norris.
Quite a few of the crew here, which is nice. But their season's been...
Coming up, Ricciardo claims he had his back up against the wall at McLaren. Honestly, that's what he felt throughout the 2 years with the team. Back in 2021, the Australian joined McLaren as one of the elite drivers on the grid after he had beaten both drivers, Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz, from the Woking-based outfit while driving a Renault. and everyone thought he was going to lead the team. Things clearly didn't go as planned for him, as he mentioned on the Fast Lane podcast. He said that thankfully he was able to find some sort of hunger to go through it. Think of it as a need to prove himself after the chain of disappointing setbacks. In fact, he said, it's kind of a thing when your back's up against the wall. You can just stay leaned up against it or push back off of it. And that was at least the approach that I wanted to try. With that said, he admitted that the circumstances weren't ideal, but he just did whatever he could to somehow make it to the end of the season. There's no doubt that the last 18 months have been a struggle, and Ricciardo even talked about what he went through on a personal level during his difficult seasons at McLaren. Opening up about his mindset, he said that he was never under any sort of illusion. Clearly, whatever happened had a list of valid reasons to justify it. As for the last 6 months, they weren't easy for him, so he was just preparing himself for whatever was next and trying to keep up his fighting spirit.
He's got pressure behind him and there's a gap ahead towards Daniel Ricciardo.
Up next, Ricciardo's controversial return to Red Bull. It's going to be pretty interesting to see him back on the team and how he'll spend the next year away from the sport. Now, let's not forget that the entire reason why he left was that Verstappen had all the spotlight back in 2018, and at the time, both of them were teammates with their racing seats. So in a way, he had the power to overtake the rising champion and win back his place. Now he's coming back as the third driver right after 2 disappointing seasons, and the McLaren axe. On the other hand, Max Verstappen is a 2-time world champion now. On top of that, the Dutchman said that Daniel should have never left Red Bull in the first place, and if he had tried to talk things out, he'd be in a much different position. Come to think of it, isn't that what's on everyone's mind right now? In fact, Ricciardo's probably thinking about the same thing. After all, things have changed over the last 2 years. While Ricciardo was out there on the F1 grid losing to his teammate badly, Verstappen was grabbing the world titles to his name. Clearly, there's quite the imbalance here, wouldn't you agree? In hindsight, the decision to leave Red Bull and ply his trade at Renault was quite the beginning of the end for the Honey Badger, because it's not just about McLaren. Even his 2 years at Renault were pretty mediocre.
You know, for me to keep my eye in, but also to try and, if I can, obviously use my experience.
Finally, 2023 is the deciding year for Daniel Ricciardo. While we're not trying to jinx anything, there are quite a lot of people in the paddock and the Honey Badger's army of fans who are super curious to see what he could do again in a Red Bull race car. If we're being honest, all it would take is one stellar performance, and Ricciardo could be right back on the grid in 2024. But he will need that chance to show the world he's still got what it takes to grab a competitive racing seat. Having said that, the upcoming season could prove to be a game changer for the Australian, because while he'll be the face of the marketing campaign right now, anything can happen in the world of Formula One.
Ricciardo and Verstappen have their strong and weak tracks, and I don't think the points gap between teammates...
You never know if there is an upcoming opportunity for him to cement his 2024 comeback. That's a wrap for this video. What's your take on Daniel Ricciardo reflecting on racing for McLaren after being axed? Do you think he has a chance to make a comeback in 2024? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.